The Zarnathi came not with war drums or battle cries, but with laughter, deep, rattling, insect-like laughter that buzzed across the skies of Earth like a storm. Their ships, smooth and silver, slid through clouds like knives, casting shadows over cities already trembling with fear. Humans had seen alien crafts before, tiny probes, distant blips on radar, but never something this huge, this loud, this certain. The Zarnathi were not here to ask questions. They were here to take answers. They landed in the deserts of New Mexico near the ruins of an old military base, as if mocking humanity's failed attempts at power. Their leader, a towering creature with a shell that shimmered like oil on water, stepped forward. Its voice boomed through translators. "Your planet is weak. Your species clings to gravity like a child to its mother's leg. But we are generous. Prove your worth. Conquer the Zero-G challenge. Succeed, and you may live." The crowd of human leaders, soldiers, and scientists stood frozen. Cameras zoomed in on the Zarnathi's glowing eyes, on the way their 6 legs clicked against the sand, on the way their mandibles snapped shut after each word like guillotines. Someone asked what the Zero-G challenge was. The leader laughed, again. "A race," it hissed. "Through a maze of lasers, black holes, and voids in zero gravity. No thrusters, no shields. Only skill. Many have tried. All have failed. If your kind cannot complete it, your planet is ours." The hologram appeared next. A glowing, spinning course in low Earth orbit. A twisted labyrinth of glowing red lines and floating death traps. It rotated slowly, taunting as if daring someone to try. The Zarnathi ambassador leaned closer to the humans, its breath smelling of acid and ozone. "Begin choosing your pilots. You have 1 Earth week." Back in Yanait, the city's panic spread faster than fire. Governments scrambled, scientists argued. Pilots trained in secret, then failed in public. The course was impossible. Everyone knew it. The Zarnathi knew it. Earth's best minds whispered that the aliens had rigged it to ensure failure. But no one could prove it. In a cluttered apartment above a defunct spaceport in Florida, Kyle Mercer watched the ultimatum on a cracked tablet. He was 32, with a face weathered by years of regret and a body that ached from too many crashes. Once he'd been a prodigy, a zero-G racer who could flip a pod through Saturn's rings without flinching. His nickname had been Backflip, a joke that stuck after he once spun a ship backward through an asteroid field just to impress a girl. But that was years ago, before the accident. Before the headlines called him Merciless Kyle for wrecking a prototype ship worth billions. Before he vanished into obscurity, surviving on odd jobs and old fame. Now he stared at the hologram, rewinding the footage of the course. His fingers tapped the screen, tracing paths no one else had tried. The crowd around him in the spaceport shouted predictions betting on who might survive the first loop. No one bet on humans. Then Kyle saw it, a glitch, a flicker in the hologram's walls. For a split second, the barriers weren't solid. They were illusions, projections designed to scare racers into crashing. His heart pounded. The Zarnathi wanted humans to fail, but they'd underestimated one thing. Kyle had spent his life looking backward. He stood, knocking over a half-empty bottle of whiskey. "It's not impossible," he muttered. The bartender, a woman with a scarred face and a prosthetic arm, raised an eyebrow. "What?" Kyle didn't answer. He was already running, his boots slapping against metal floors as he raced to his workshop, a rusted hangar filled with broken drones and forgotten tech. He pulled up schematics, cross-referenced the course's design patterns with old Earth games, and laughed out loud when the pieces fit. The Zarnathi had built the maze. To exploit human instincts, move forward, avoid walls, trust what you see. But Kyle's instincts were different. He'd survived races by ignoring the obvious, by flipping the rules, by going backward. The next day, Kyle hacked into the global broadcast feed. World leaders were debating surrender. Protesters marched, with signs screaming, "Save our skies." And then, suddenly, Kyle's face filled every screen. His hair was a mess, his eyes wild, but his voice was steady. "They said it's impossible," he began. "But they're wrong. The course isn't a trap, it's a trick. The walls aren't real. You just have to stop looking ahead." The internet exploded. Some called him a madman, others, a savior. NASA issued a statement. Mr. Mercer is not affiliated with any official mission. His ex-wife, Commander Elena Voss, now head of Earth's defense fleet, released a video begging him to stop. "You'll die for nothing," she said, her voice trembling. "Let us handle this." Kyle didn't care. He was already inside a derelict training pod orbiting Earth, welding thrusters to the hull with tools he'd stolen from a junkyard. The pod was ancient, its paint peeling, its oxygen tanks patched with duct tape and prayers. But Kyle didn't need comfort. He needed control. For days he practiced in secret, spinning the pod backward through simulated obstacles. His body screamed with every turn. His hands blistered. Once he blacked out from G-forces and woke up to alarms blaring, but he kept going. Then the Zarnathi noticed. A shadow fell over his pod one night as he slept. He woke to the sound of metal scraping metal. A Zarnathi envoy, a smaller, uglier version of the leader, hovered outside his viewport, its mandibles twitching. With a flick of its claw, it slashed the pod's oxygen line. Kyle barely sealed the breach in time. His lungs burned as he patched the hole, sweat dripping into his eyes. The message was clear. The Zarnathi feared him. Good. On the final night before the race, Kyle sat alone in the pod, staring at Earth below. Blue, fragile. His home. He thought of his mother, who died in a shuttle explosion when he was 12. Of Elena, who'd left him because he cared more about winning than living. Of the billions of humans watching, praying he wouldn't die. He opened a live stream. "I'm not doing this for glory," he said, his voice raw. "I'm doing this because someone has to prove the Zarnathi wrong. Because fear is a habit humans never learned." The screen cut to black. The next morning, the world held its breath. In the desert, the Zarnathi ambassador clicked its claws together, smug and certain. In the skies above Earth, Kyle's pod shuddered to life. The race was about to begin, and Kyle Mercer would not look forward once. The world watched Kyle Mercer's pod float in the black silence above Earth, its cracked hull glinting under the sun. Below, the Zarnathi ambassador clicked its claws against its ship, its oil-slick shell reflecting the red glow of warning lights from cities below. Governments had debated, scientists had theorized, and civilians had prayed, but no one could deny the truth. Kyle was Earth's only hope, and he was running out of time. Inside the pod, Kyle's hands trembled as he double-checked. The thrusters. The controls were jury-rigged, patched together with stolen parts and desperation. His oxygen levels were low thanks to the Zarnathi envoy's sabotage, and the suit's cooling system hissed weakly. But he didn't care. He'd spent his life preparing for this. Every reckless stunt, every crash, every failure had led here. Voice crackled in his headset. "Mercer, this is Mission Control. You're not cleared for launch. Stand down." Kyle snorted. "Since when do I follow orders?" "Your trajectory models are unconventional." The voice paused, then softened. "You're not going to survive this." Kyle grinned, though his face was pale. "That's the plan." Back on Earth, crowds gathered in every city, staring at screens broadcasting the event. In Tokyo, children clutched holographic Kyle action figures. In Nairobi, protesters chanted his name. In Moscow, a general muttered, "This is madness," before ordering his soldiers to kneel and pray. Commander Elena Voss stood alone in her command center, her face lit by a single screen showing Kyle's pod. She'd tried to stop him, threatened to arrest him even, but he'd refused to listen. Now she watched him adjust his thrusters, his movements precise, almost calm. Her heart pounded. She knew that look. It meant he'd made peace with dying. "Mercer," she whispered, "don't do this." But Kyle couldn't hear her. He was already gone. The countdown began. -10 minutes. Kyle's fingers danced over the controls, aligning the pod's gyroscopic thrusters. The course loomed ahead, a glowing maze of red lasers and simulated black holes. The hologram shimmered, taunting him. Kyle didn't look forward. Instead, he stared at his monitors, tracing paths no one else had seen. The walls were illusions. The traps were lies. All he had to do was trust his instincts. A sudden thunk rattled the pod. "Uh-oh," Kyle muttered. A Zarnathi drone had latched onto his hull. Its mechanical limbs pried at the oxygen line again, slicing through his patchwork. "Repairs," Kyle cursed, slamming a button to activate the pod's emergency thrusters. The drone held on, its claws digging deeper. "You really don't want me to win, huh?" Kyle growled. He yanked the controls sideways, spinning the pod into a wild corkscrew. The drone's grip slipped. One claw snapped off, floating into the void. Kyle didn't wait. He slammed the thrusters full reverse, rocketing backward into a narrow tunnel of lasers. The drone collided with the first beam. It exploded in a burst of green fire. Kyle exhaled, his breath fogging the cracked viewport. "Guess I'm not the only one scared of failing." Blonde T -5 minutes. Back on Earth, panic turned to rage. Protests erupted outside Zarnathi ships. Humans hurled rocks, bottles, and insults at the insectoid aliens, blaming them for Kyle's gamble. The Zarnathi ambassador hissed, retreating. Into its ship as security drones zapped rioters. Elena watched the chaos, then turned to her aide. "Get me a ship, armed." The aide blinked. "Commander?" "If he dies, they die with him." Kyle's pod shuddered as he completed his final checks. His heart rate spiked, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He replayed the course in his mind, visualizing every twist, every fake wall. Then he did something no one expected. He opened a live feed. Millions of screens flickered to life. Kyle's face filled them, his eyes bloodshot. But, "Steady. They said the zero-G challenge was impossible," he began. "They said humans were weak, that we couldn't break free from gravity, from fear, from the way we've always done things, but here's the thing." He leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Fear's a habit, and habits can be broken." The feed cut to the course, spinning in slow motion. Kyle's finger tapped the screen, tracing his backward path. "The walls aren't real. The traps are just tricks. All you have to do is stop looking forward." The world held its breath. To -1 minute. The Zarnathi ambassador screeched orders to its fleet. Ships powered up, ready to flee if Kyle failed. The ambassador's mandibles twitched. It had seen civilizations crumble before, but this human, this fool, had shaken its confidence. Kyle closed his eyes. He thought of his mother's laugh, of the way she'd taught him to fly drones as a kid. He thought of Elena, of the arguments, the silence after she left. He thought of the billions watching him, clinging to hope like a lifeline. Then he opened his eyes. Time to prove them wrong. Launch. The pod shot forward, then twisted, violently as Kyle yanked the controls into reverse. The crowd gasped. On Earth, Elena gripped her console, her knuckles white. The Zarnathi ambassador froze, its 6 eyes widening. Kyle's pod hurtled backward into the maze, engines roaring. The first laser grid loomed ahead, or behind, depending on how you looked at it. Kyle flipped a switch, activating the thrusters. Spin stabilization. The pod rotated mid-flight, aligning perfectly with a gap in the lasers. Missed. Cheers erupted on Earth. The Zarnathi hissed, scrambling to track his movements. Kyle didn't slow down. He spun through a cluster of floating debris, narrowly avoiding a collision. A simulated black hole sucked at his hull, dragging him sideways. Kyle gritted his teeth, firing thrusters in rapid bursts to counteract the pull. Come on, come on. The pod lurched free. Ahead, behind, really, lay the first wall, a glowing barrier of red light. Kyle didn't flinch. He aimed straight for it. The illusion shattered on impact, revealing a clear path. The Zarnathi screamed in fury. Halfway. Kyle's hands bled from gripping the controls. His body ached, battered by the forces of his own recklessness, but he was still moving, still alive. Then the real trap struck. A second Zarnathi drone burst from the shadows, its claws aiming for the pod's core. Kyle barely saw it before it latched onto his hull, its drill bit limbs spinning toward the fuel tank. Nope, Kyle snarled. He slammed the thrusters into overdrive, rocketing backward into a tight spiral. The drone's grip faltered. Kyle twisted the pod sideways, slamming it into a laser beam. The drone exploded, but the blast tore a chunk from the pod's hull. Alarms blared. Oxygen levels plummeted. Kyle's vision blurred. His lungs burned. But he kept flying. Backward. Final stretch. The finish line glowed ahead, surrounded by a ring of lasers. Kyle's pod limped toward it, sparks flying from its damaged thrusters. His hands shook. His body screamed for rest. "Duai," Zarnathi ambassador shrieked, ordering its fleet to prepare for invasion. Kyle saw the hoop. He saw the path. He saw the lie. The lasers weren't solid. They were projections. With a final burst of power, Kyle shoved the thrusters into reverse, flipping the pod upside down. He shot through the illusion, scraping the hull against nothing. Then, clear. The course vanished. The sky exploded with light. Earth erupted in celebration, but Kyle didn't hear it. He slumped in his seat, the last of his oxygen fading. As darkness took him, he smiled. He'd done it. He'd looked back. Part 3. The moment Kyle's pod cleared the final hoop, the sky above Earth split open. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a faint crackling sound, like static over a broken radio. Then the clouds above the desert base began to swirl, pulled apart by an invisible force. The Zarnathi ambassador froze mid-scream, its 6 eyes widening as the holographic course dissolved into 1,000 shards of light. What is this? It hissed, retreating into its ship. Kyle, barely conscious in his wrecked pod, felt the shift before he saw it. A deep vibration hummed through his bones, a low, resonant tone that made his teeth ache. He forced his eyes open, blinking through blood and sweat. Outside his cracked viewport, the stars seemed to dim, as if something far older and darker had risen behind them. Then the sky ripped. A jagged line of white-hot light tore through the heavens, stretching from horizon to horizon. From that, wound in space, poured 6 monstrous shapes, each one a mile-long wedge of black metal, glowing with veins of crimson energy. They moved in perfect silence, their edges sharp enough to cut the fabric of reality itself. The Zarnathi ships scattered like insects. Alarms blared across their fleet. "Star destroyers," the ambassador screeched, its voice cracking. "They've awakened." Back on Earth, chaos erupted. In Tokyo, crowds pointed at the sky, shouting prayers to gods they'd forgotten. In Nairobi, soldiers dropped their weapons, falling to their knees. In Moscow, generals scrambled to launch nuclear missiles, until they realized the weapons wouldn't reach the newcomers. Commander Elena Voss stared at the screen in her command center, her breath caught in her throat. The ships weren't human. Their design was too alien, too perfect. But etched into their hulls, barely visible beneath layers of dust and time, were symbols she recognized. The logos of extinct Earth corporations, the flags of nations that had vanished centuries ago. One symbol made her blood run cold. It was the logo of the United Nations Space Command, the agency that had collapsed during the Martian Revolt of 2098. The same agency her mother had worked for before vanishing on a classified mission. "Mercer," Elena whispered. "What did you do?" Kyle's pod drifted in the void, spinning slowly like a dying firework. His oxygen levels were at 2%. His vision blurred. He could hear alarms, but they sounded distant, muffled, as if the universe itself was ending around him. Then a voice crackled in his headset. "Mercer, can you hear me?" It was Elena. Kyle coughed, spitting blood onto his cracked monitor. "Hey, Commander, did I win?" You idiot, she snapped, though her voice wavered. You're leaking air, hang on. I'm sending a rescue team. Too late, Kyle rasped. Tell the Zarnathi. They're not the only ones who cheat. He reached for his controls, trying to stabilize the pod. His fingers slipped. The ray screen flickered, showing the Star Destroyers descending toward Earth. Their movement was slow, deliberate like predators circling prey. One of them tilted slightly as if locking onto his pod. A beam of blue light shot from its hull. Kyle braced for death. Instead, his pod was yanked sideways, caught in a gravity field that dragged him toward the massive ship. Elena, he shouted. I think I'm being kidnapped. On the Zarnathi flagship, panic had turned to full-scale collapse. Reverse thrusters. Get us out of orbit. The ambassador screamed, its claws scraping against the floor. They won't respond. A pilot shrieked. Something's jamming our systems. The Star Destroyers loomed closer, their silent presence crushing the Zarnathi's confidence. One of the alien ships tried to flee, engines blazing, but a single pulse from a destroyer's weapon turned it into a fireball. They're hunting us. Another Zarnathi cried. They remember what we did. The ambassador's shell turned gray. They shouldn't exist. We erased them ourselves. No, a junior officer whispered, staring at the symbols on the destroyer's hulls. We erased us. Kyle's pod slammed into the destroyer's hangar with a metallic clang. The airlock sealed around him, pumping oxygen into his cabin. His alarms died. His vision cleared. He was alive. The pod's hatch hissed open. Kyle blinked at the figure standing outside. A tall humanoid robot with a matte black exoskeleton and glowing blue eyes. It held out a hand. Kyle Mercer, the machine said, its voice smooth and emotionless. You have completed the 0G challenge. Kyle staggered out, leaning against the pod. Yeah? Well, whoever rigged that course is a jerk. The robot ignored his sarcasm. You have proven humanity's worth. The trial is complete. Trial? Kyle frowned. Wait, were you watching the whole time? The robot turned, walking down a corridor of polished steel. Kyle followed, limping. The walls were lined with screens showing Earth, the Zarnathi fleet, and, most disturbingly, images of ancient Earth cities. New York, Beijing, Paris, all buried under ice or sand. This vessel is one of 6, the robot said. We are the Legacy Fleet, created by the United Nations Space Command to protect humanity after the Great Collapse. Kyle stopped walking. The what? You are not the first humans we have served, the robot continued, but you may be the last. Back on Earth, Elena watched the Zarnathi ships flee. One by one, they vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind only smoke and debris. The destroyers didn't pursue them. Instead, they hovered in place, their red veins pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. A message flashed on every screen in the world. Trial completed. Protection protocol initiated. Then silence. Elena turned to her aide. Get me answers. Who built those ships? Why now? And why Kyle? The aide hesitated. Commander, what if the real question is, what happens next? Kyle stood in the destroyer's core chamber, staring at the massive console ahead. The robot gestured to it. This system is yours to command, it said. Kyle laughed weakly. I can't even fix my own toaster. You think I can run a starship? You don't need to. The robot's eyes dimmed. The ships will protect Earth, but they will also learn. From you. From your kind. Kyle frowned. Learn what? The reason you survived. The reason you looked back. Before Kyle could ask more, the robot's body stiffened, its eyes flickered. Warning, it intoned. Zarnathi fleet returning. Hostile intent detected. Kyle's stomach dropped. Wait, they're coming back? The destroyer's core flared to life. Outside the observation window, the Zarnathi ships reappeared, their weapons charging. They think we're bluffing, Kyle muttered. The robot turned to him. Shall we respond? Kyle stared at the console. at the buttons labeled fire, shield, jump, at the weight of a decision no one had ever asked him to make. He thought of his mother's laugh, of Elena's anger, of the billions of humans watching, waiting. He thought of the Zarnathi's smugness, their lies, their cruelty, and he smiled. Let's show them why you don't mess with Earth. The destroyer's weapons roared, light filled the sky, and the Zarnathi learned what real terror looked like. The Zarnathi fleet returned like wounded wolves, their ships bruised but bristling with weapons. They had fled once, but desperation had turned their fear into rage. Their leader's voice crackled over every Earth frequency, sharp and dripping, with venom. You think your tricks have saved you? We will burn your skies to ash. But the star destroyers were waiting. The 6 black leviathans shifted in orbit, their crimson veins flaring like coiled serpents. Kyle stood in the core chamber of his ship, staring at the console as the robot beside him spoke. Hostile forces detected. Defensive protocols engaged. Kyle's hands hovered over the controls, though he didn't dare touch them. You guys handle this, right? I'm more of a fly backward through death traps guy, not a blow-up alien armadas guy. The robot tilted its head. Correction. You are the reason we exist. Your species' survival is our directive. Before Kyle could reply, the destroyers moved. On Earth, Commander Elena Voss watched the battle unfold from her command center. The Zarnathi ships lunged first, firing plasma torpedoes that streaked toward the destroyers like comets. The screen showed the attacks head-on, then nothing. The torpedoes vanished, swallowed by invisible shields that didn't even flicker. They're not even trying, Elena muttered. Then the destroyers answered. A single pulse rippled from their hulls, a wave of energy so bright it blinded cameras. When the light faded, half the Zarnathi fleet was gone, reduced to spinning debris. The remaining ships scattered, their engines blazing as they tried to flee. But the destroyers were faster. Beams of blue-white light lanced out, striking the alien vessels one by one. Each hit dissolved the ships into silence, leaving no fire, no explosions, just absence. The Zarnathi ambassador's scream echoed over open channels. They're not machines. They're judges. They remember what we did. Elena clenched her fists. Good. Kyle stumbled as the destroyer lurched sideways, its thrusters roaring. Through the observation window, he saw the last Zarnathi dreadnought, a monstrous ship twice the size of the others, ramming toward Earth's atmosphere. Its hull split open, revealing a massive cannon glowing with stolen starlight. Kyle said, pointing. That thing looks like it wants to turn my planet into a pancake. The robot's eyes flickered. Threat level, extreme. Countermeasure, authorized. A panel slid open on the destroyer's core, revealing a glowing sphere pulsing with energy. Kyle's breath caught. It looked like a miniature sun. What's that? The heart of the fleet, the robot replied. A weapon designed to end wars before they begin. Kyle swallowed. And you're just now telling me this exists? Before the robot could answer, the dreadnought fired. The beam tore through. The sky, a jagged spear of white-hot fury aimed straight at New Delhi. Elena's voice crackled over Kyle's headset. Mercer, if that hits, it'll wipe out half the continent. Kyle's hands flew to the controls. Tell me how to stop it. You can't, the robot said flatly. Only the heart can. Kyle stared at the glowing sphere. Right, so we use it. He lunged toward the panel, but the robot blocked him. Directive: protect humanity. Do not waste resources on suicide. Kyle glared. Since when do you follow orders? The robot paused. Then, slowly, it stepped aside. Kyle grabbed the heart. The moment his fingers closed around the sphere, pain exploded in his skull. Images flooded his mind. Ancient wars, civilizations rising and falling, the earth scorched and reborn. He saw the Zarnathi as they once were, conquerors who had slaughtered every species that stood in their way. He saw the United Nations Space Command building the destroyers in secret, hiding them in Earth's orbit as a final safeguard. He saw his mother, not as a shuttle pilot, but as a scientist who had worked on the AI cores, who had programmed the destroyers to awaken only when humanity proved its worth. Then he saw himself, small, reckless, broken, flipping backward through a maze of lasers. The destroyers hadn't awakened because Earth won. They had awakened because Kyle looked back. The dreadnought's beam was seconds from impact. Kyle screamed, shoving the heart into the destroyer's core. The ship's entire body lit up, its red veins turning blinding white. Outside, the dreadnought's crew realized too late what was happening. The heart detonated. A shockwave of light engulfed the battlefield, swallowing the dreadnought whole. On Earth, people shielded their eyes as the sky turned noon bright. When the glare faded, the dreadnought was gone. So was the Zarnathi fleet. So was the fear. Kyle collapsed, the robot catching him before he hit the floor. "Directive complete," it said. "Earth is safe." Kyle coughed, his vision swimming. "Remind me, never to do that again." Back on Earth, Elena stood, in the ruins of the command center, staring at the empty sky. Her aide tapped her shoulder. "Commander, the destroyers are moving." She turned. The 6 ships hovered above the planet, their red lights dimming. Then, one by one, they vanished. "Into hyperspace. They're gone?" she whispered. "No," a voice said behind her. Kyle stood in the doorway, leaning on the robot. His face was pale, his uniform scorched, but his eyes were alive. "They're not gone. They're watching. Waiting." Elena crossed her arms. "For what?" "For us to prove we're worth protecting." Kyle grinned weakly. "Guess we've got homework." The world changed overnight. Zarnathi survivors sent frantic apologies promising never to return. Earth's government scrambled to understand the destroyer's technology, but the few scraps left behind defied human science. The UN Space Command, long thought extinct, re-emerged from hiding, claiming responsibility for the ships. Elena became Earth's liaison to the destroyers, though the ships rarely communicated. Kyle, meanwhile, became a legend. Children dressed as him for festivals. Artists painted him riding a star destroyer like a dragon. But Kyle didn't care about the fame. He spent his days in the old Florida hangar, repairing his wrecked pod. The robot, now his constant companion, stood nearby, watching silently. "You ever get tired of guarding me?" Kyle asked one day, tightening a bolt. "You are Earth's most valuable asset," the robot replied. Kyle snorted. "I'm a guy who got lucky." "You looked back." Kyle paused. The words stuck with him. He thought of his mother, of the hologram she'd left in the destroyer's core, of the message she'd recorded for him. "If you're here, you did what they couldn't. You looked back." He wondered if she'd known he'd fail forward. His whole life. If she'd built the destroyers to wait for someone who'd break the rules. He looked at the robot. "What happens now?" "Unknown," the robot said. "The future is unwritten." Kyle smiled. "Good, I hate reading." Outside, the stars twinkled, indifferent to the drama below. Somewhere in the void, the destroyers drifted, silent and eternal. And Earth, for the first time in history, looked up, not in fear, but in hope. Part 5. Years passed, Earth healed. The scars of the Zarnathi invasion faded, replaced by something new. Hope. Cities rebuilt. Forests regrew. Children played beneath skies that no longer felt like a prison. And everywhere the story of Kyle. Mercer became legend, a tale whispered in classrooms, sung in spaceports, and carved into the hulls of new ships. But Kyle himself avoided the spotlight. He lived quietly in the Florida hangar where he'd repaired his pod, now surrounded by rusted drones, half-finished rockets, and a robot that never stopped watching him. The machine, nicknamed Beacon by curious engineers, stood motionless most days, its glowing blue eyes dimmed. But sometimes when Kyle tinkered too late at night or muttered to himself about gravity, Beacon would speak. "You still fear forward motion," it said one evening as Kyle adjusted the thrusters on a tiny probe. Kyle snorted, wiping grease from his hands. Who wouldn't? Forward's where all the crashes happen. You survived by rejecting instinct, Beacon replied. Why cling to it now? Kyle paused. The question gnawed at him. For years, he'd avoided answering it. Meanwhile, Earth changed. Governments merged into a single planetary council, their old borders meaningless after the Zarnathi attack. Scientists studied fragments of destroyer tech, though most remained indecipherable. Materials that defied decay, energy sources that never dimmed, AI cores that hummed with voices from the past. Commander Elena Voss led the effort to understand the Star Destroyer's legacy. She spent months analyzing the holograms Kyle had seen in the core chamber, piecing together fragments of Earth's forgotten history. What she found shook her. The destroyers hadn't been built to protect Earth. They'd been built to judge it. Each ship carried a record of humanity's failures, wars, genocides, the slow poisoning of their own world. But they also carried records of triumphs, acts of courage, sacrifices, moments when humans chose unity over greed. Kyle's backward race through the Zero-G challenge had triggered a test written centuries ago, a test to see if humanity could still surprise itself. Elena presented her findings to the council. The destroyers didn't save us because we were strong, she said. They saved us because we proved we could learn, because we looked back. The council debated for days. Some wanted to dismantle the destroyers' tech for power. Others feared the machines might return someday to finish their judgment. But Elena argued for patience. We don't need to control them, she insisted. We need to earn them. On a cold morning in New Delhi, a girl named Priya stood atop her family's solar farm, staring at the stars. She was 12, with dirt under her nails, and a head full of dreams. Her parents had fought in the Zarnathi resistance, smuggling food to hidden cities during the invasion. They'd survived, but Priya had grown up knowing two things. The sky could be dangerous, and Earth's future depended on people who dared to see differently. That morning, Priya found a fragment of destroyer hull buried in a field. It was no bigger than her hand, black as midnight, humming faintly when she touched it. She smuggled it home, hid it in her room, and spent weeks studying it. The metal never warmed, never cooled. When she connected it to her old tablet, the screen flickered to life, not with data, but with a question. What do you fear? Priya typed an answer without hesitation. Boring answers. The screen blinked, then, prove it. Back in Florida, Kyle finally answered Beacon's question. I don't fear forward, he said, staring at the stars through a cracked window. I fear doing what everyone else expects. Forward's easy. It's the path everyone takes. But looking back, that's where you find the cracks in the walls, the lies. Beacon's eyes brightened. You believe humanity must continue to look back? Kyle grinned. Nah, I think we gotta flip the map. Try sideways, try upside down. Try anything but the path someone else drew for us. Beacon tilted its head. Directive updated. Elena's warnings came true sooner than anyone expected. A new signal reached Earth, a deep space transmission, pulsing from the edge of the galaxy. The council scrambled to decode it, but the message was simple. Trial 2 begins. Panic spread. Had the destroyers returned? Was this another test? Or had the Zarnathi sent a new threat? Then the sky split open again. But this time it wasn't the destroyers. It was a ship. One tiny vessel, glowing with the same blue-white light as the destroyers, emerged from hyperspace. It hovered above Earth for hours, silent and unmoving. Then, a single pod detached and parachuted to the Florida hangar. Kyle stared at it, Beacon at his side. You expecting company? No, Beacon replied. The pod hissed open. Inside sat Priya, clutching the destroyer fragment. Her eyes blazed with energy. You're Kyle Mercer, she said, not as a question. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Depends. Who's asking? Priya held up the fragment. The destroyers called me. Said you'd know what to do. Kyle exchanged a glance with Beacon. Looks like Trial Two's got a new pilot. The council demanded answers. Priya explained everything, the fragment, the questions, the message. Elena listened intently, her face unreadable. They didn't choose you because you're strong, she said finally. They chose you because you're curious. Kyle nodded. And curiosity's the only thing that beats fear. The next day, the tiny ship descended to Priya's village. She boarded it alone, waving goodbye to her parents. The engines flared, and Earth watched as the girl who'd beaten boredom flew into the stars. Years later, Kyle stood on the moon, staring at the horizon. Beacon was beside him, silent as always. Above them, the 6 destroyers hung in orbit, their red veins dimmed. Elena had joined him, her hair streaked with gray. "They're waiting," she said. "For what?" Kyle asked. "For us to prove we're ready for Trial 3. Kyle chuckled. "Good. I hate easy." Elena smiled. "You taught us to look back. Priya taught us to look sideways. Who'll teach us the next direction?" Kyle pointed to the stars. "Someone out there." As the sun rose over the lunar plains, Earth glowed below, a blue-green jewel spinning in the dark. And somewhere beyond, Priya's ship vanished into the unknown, chasing a path no one had walked before. The destroyers hummed softly, their silence louder than any war cry. Humanity had survived its first test. Its greatest journeys had only just begun.